the Worth Knowing live stream on my Substack, Worth Knowing with Matt Robison, and also on the Cliff's Edge channel on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, LinkedIn. Actually, we're on YouTube twice because now we're streaming in landscape and portrait mode, so pick your weapon. And we're on the Substack belonging to today's guest, who's lurking, I tell you, off stage. I'm looking forward to bringing him on in just a couple of minutes because there's so much to talk about today. Trump and Hegseth's war crimes, whether the Democrats have finally overcome their struggles with connecting with voters. And we might see that in the big special election today, or maybe not. Why maybe we shouldn't all be quite as worried about the Supreme Court as it seems. Good argument on that coming from our guest. Some remarkable positive trends that somehow we don't hear enough about. Sports, including gambling and statistics and all kinds of things that have completely changed the sports experience in the last few years. But I want to begin with media, because we're fortunate enough to have a guest today who is a member of it and also one of the most effective critics of it that we have. Look, it's trite to say that the media is failing or in crisis or broken. I think on the YouTube thumbnail for today's show, I suggested that it might be in a death spiral. Yes, I think I was trying to catch a hold of some eyeballs there, but I also kind of mean it, because if you look at the forces that are coming together to disrupt and disintegrate the news media, it becomes clear that we're dealing with some incredibly big and maybe impossible challenges. I want to break this down into four parts, four forces that I think are coming together to undermine and possibly destroy the traditional function of journalism in America. And yes, I know I really should winnow this down to three, because our brains are better at holding on to three things than four, but I can't. So I hope you'll let me roll with this. The first part is technology. More than 30 years ago, the rise of the internet disrupted the revenue model for the news media outlets that were the foundation of our information ecosystem. First, it was traditional newspapers. From 2003 through 2013, newspaper ad revenue fell from around $45 billion to around $25 billion. From 1989 to 2012, the number of journalists employed in American newspapers dropped by 40%. The total circulation of newspapers dropped from a high of 63 million by more than half to around 21 million by 2022. And if you're thinking, well, can't they make up for some of that through online visits? No. Even just between 2020 and 2022, the average monthly visitors to the top 50 US newspapers fell by half. And that's part of the second force, which is the rise of digital and social media platforms. As more people started accessing their news through Facebook and then Twitter and then TikTok, meant that, first of all, anyone could create or disseminate news. And second of all, what counted as news, what got attention, also began to evolve. Now, look, there's an old saying in newspapers that if it bleeds, it leads. I'm not suggesting that news used to be all high-minded facts with zero sensationalism. Look, the sidebar. I grew up in New York City, where my hometown paper was the New York Post. It ran headlines like "Headless Body Found in Topless Bar." Remember that one? But still, there's been a sea change in the kind of information that people are getting and that counts as the news. A 2024 analysis of 150 studies showed that misinformation spread 6 times faster than accurate information online, with emotions and platform algorithms playing a significant role in its spread. And that leads directly to the third force, the collapse of mainstream media on television and online as it competed for brain space in the attention economy. It's not just that audiences now have many more choices, from social media to video to podcast, true crime TV shows, and streaming documentaries. So that all of them interact to various degrees with what we might call news and information about the world. Now, it's commonplace to say that the media is fragmented. What that means is each individual outlet is reaching only a fraction of the audience it used to. Take the CBS Evening News. I grew up with it. In 1980, Walter Cronkite could get 30 million viewers a night. Nowadays, it gets about 4 million. Now, in part, that's because in 1985, the average home got 18 channels. Within 20 years, was more than 118. So we know there's fragmentation, but the bigger issue is how those fragmented media outlets have tried to compete not just with each other for eyeballs and earballs, but also with all of those other competitors on podcasts and live streams like this one that may be offering legitimate news, along with other competitors that are offering just straight up infotainment, which is what led to the fourth force, the emergence of narrative and ideological journalism with content substituting for news reporting and objectivity. Now, look, I can't prove this, but I think it's fair to make a direct connection to the plummeting trust that Americans have for national news organizations, which has fallen by 12 percentage points over the last decade, and these kinds of effects. Democrats correctly see right-wing media as shameless propaganda and mainstream media as hopelessly compromised by their corporate ownership and their fear of losing insider access. And that causes them to soft pedal everything Donald Trump does. But media critics like today's guest have also pointed out, in fairness, that the mainstream media hasn't helped themselves by trying to play the game that they've almost been forced to play of trying to grab their share of the attention economy by doing more so-called narrative journalism that caters to emotion and storytelling and a certain amount of performative virtue signaling over rigorous reporting. Now, to be clear, this is not for me to suggest any false equivalence. I've laid out on this show before. I'll happily do it again if anyone wants me to do that. The fact that liberal media bias is a bullshit myth invented by and for the right wing to gaslight us. Both in its reach and impact and its fanatical devotion to pushing lies and propaganda, right-wing media vastly outstrips the mainstream media, especially in terms of what it's doing to our society and our brains. There's no hope for them. But the question is there hope for what's left of the mainstream media? So let's ask an elite member of the mainstream media. Here he is, revealed like a magic trick. Mike Pesca, formerly of every major mainstream media outlet in existence. NPR, WAPO, The Atlantic, the list goes on. You've been on Radiolab. You've been on, I struggle to list all of your distinguished outlets. But let me ask you this. You've written extensively about the media, about how NPR has lost its way, about how narrative podcasts have kind of lost their way in emphasizing narrative journalism over reporting. Have things kind of gone too far? How bad have things really gotten?
Well, you said the word narrative. First of all, congrats on the vertical, the landscape, the horizontal. I want to see an oblique, diagonal video stream. You have it in you, Matt. All of the ways to show a video. You've said narrative a couple times. I've never critiqued narrative podcasting or narratives as a technique of media. What I have critiqued, and I think it's a valid critique, is that especially for a time, and we're correcting out of it, and my NPR critique definitely falls into this camp, that for years, the idea of objectivity was thrown overboard, not just tweaked, questioned, and improved, but aggressively depicted as a force that gets in the way of truth. So objectivity was denigrated in journalism schools, was critiqued and became a dirty word within newsrooms, to the point where even the New York Times and their publisher, in writing an essay in the Columbia Journalism Review, he was defending objectivity and the goals of objectivity with Sulzberger, but he couldn't even use the word objectivity because he knew that it became anathema to a large part of journalists today. So in place of objectivity wasn't narrative, it was advocacy. It was, first we have to identify what the truth is, and then we will report from that basis. And a guy named Wesley Lowery put this in writing. I mean, a lot of people were thinking it. The New York Times ran the op-ed. He's, for other reasons, discredited or somewhat discredited right now. But this was a spasm. This was a trend that really not only served the media poorly, but because it became public, I think we got to see where the media tripped over its own shoelaces, which was, there is always the idea that we can improve on what the definition of objectivity is. But once we start to think that objectivity gets in the way of presenting to our audience a truthful depiction of the world, once we start asking these postmodern-y questions like what is truth and what is objectivity, and especially as we do this when the former president is denying election results, we just totally discredit ourselves in the eyes of the reasonable viewer or reader who really wants to open up the Cleveland Plain Dealer or the Sacramento Bee. And when those news organizations purport this is an objective take on the news, they don't say, ooh, objective, whose objectivity? They say, oh, yeah, that's what I want because I need to orient myself in the world. And that was journalism's fault.
It feels like we are faced with the unending, I don't like to invoke Trump every other breath because like that's part of his game. He just desperately wants the attention, but I can't help it. This is sort of the unending Trump dilemma of, you know, we have to sort of react to all of the things that get thrown out there. by him and by his minions. We can't just kind of let them go by, but we can't get caught in like a constant fact-checking spasm either. And I think what's been particularly difficult for the mainstream media is to try to, do that function, perform that function, and try to appear to have some objectivity, appear to have some, for lack of a better word, balance. They try to both sides things. They try to say, hey, we have some reserve. We're stepping back here. We're not putting our thumb on the scale. And so it's just this push-pull where Fox News feels no restraint whatsoever. They feel absolutely emboldened to just straight up propaganda 24/7. The New York Times, any of the other mainstream outlets, they try to, no, we're above this. Plus, it helps them maintain their insider access. And so what you're left with is a very confusing mishmash that's satisfying no one. I think that's what's sort of stuck in my craw about it, is that it's really satisfying no one. You have people on the left who say, hey, you're really soft soaping everything Trump is doing. You're not holding him to account. You're not being robust in your objectivity. And yet they're sort of also wading into these like, well, we're going to do narrative journalism and we're going to put our thumb on the scale in the other direction to push kind of an ideology. It seems like they just can't get the balance right.
Well, the New York Times is doing extremely well. I mean, they're one of the only news organizations that have really thrived in the second Trump term. In the first Trump term, a lot of them did. People retreated to places like NPR and the Washington Post. I think some of those organizations, for different reasons, sullied their brands. What's going on now is that I think the New York Times has corrected, is more or less doing it right, knows that you don't have to report every story on Trump with a ream of fact checks because that is known or priced in, but it also makes the actual fact checks, when they're important, that much more valuable. And if you read the New York Times, they constantly do stories wherever Trump talks about this or that price coming down, and they'll check every single one of his assertions. It's there, but the main thing isn't liar lies again. A big thing the New York Times used to do was to say, as Donald Trump suggested, without evidence. And oftentimes he did suggest these things without evidence. Every once in a while, the things he suggested without evidence turned out to be true, even if it was without evidence that the Times knew at the time. But my point is, you could apply the without evidence rubric to any number of public figures. It was only applied to Trump. So I'm not sure that that was fair. And that was one thing the New York Times corrected on. Now, I think what's going on is there is a very robust flavor of resistance journalism, or the journalism that will constantly call out Trump. Substacks number 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, let's say, on the most popular Substack list, right? Substacks like the Bulwark and the Contrarian and what's the name of that number one Substack? The Historian from Northeastern.
Heather Cox Richardson.
Yes.
Letters from an American.
Right. So what is that doing except constantly calling out Donald Trump with a patina of history? Yeah. But my point is that the going overboard and reporting on Trump as if your duty is to forestall any possibility of any American ever voting for him. This is not what most of the public is actually desiring in their media. So it is true if you just play it straight, or to quote Marty Barron, back when the Washington Post was a truly robust news organization, we're going to go to work, not go to war. That's what most news consumers want. Some news consumers want a war against Trump. It's warranted. It's there on Substack. It's there. You mentioned Fox. It's there on MSNBC. Like, we know what their editorial position is. But it doesn't put most of the media in good stead for viewers, readers, or potential or former viewers or readers who say, I'm not engaged in a culture war. I'm engaged in a fact-finding mission.
All right, I'm going to channel my inner Pesca for a moment and try to adopt. This is me trying to adopt my best, Pesca approach to an interview, where I'm going to give you a little nudge against something you wrote recently. And I think in defending it, its true virtue is going to emerge. So you recently wrote This is a piece of media critique and analysis about Pablo Torre, who's recently done some very good work in unearthing the what's the Clippers, the name of aspiration.
Yeah, the Kawhi Leonard company,
bullshit. Yeah. So I mean, the man does some good work, but you pointed out that he recently did a deep dive narrative podcast on conservative icon Riley Gaines, and you found it wanting. It seems to me like he pointed out some useful things for people to know, like, hey, this is kind of a conservative frame up job. But you felt like it kind of missed the mark. Why?
Well, he has many. This is how you have to operate in today's media. So he has a podcast, and he collaborated this with Mother Jones, and there's a video version of it. And it wasn't really narrative. It was in depth. He interviewed, or he had some interplay with the Mother Jones byline reporter, and they presented all their findings. So one of the entities was titled All American Grift. We investigated Trump's favorite sports troll. So I wonder where he's gonna land on that. And the Mother Jones magazine was called How Right-Wing Superstar Riley Gaines Built an Anti-Trans Empire. And the video version of it was, What is Riley Gaines Hiding? So these are provocations. If you want to excuse, you got to hype these days. You got to get out there on the hustle to get some eyeballs. Sure. What was Riley Gaines hiding? The answer was that she was this conservative stalwart who is advancing conservative points, is funded by conservatives. That's scandal one. I mean, to me, this is obvious. And also, let me add that in his reporting, Pablo Torre found that she was paid, I think it was $125,000 or $135,000 in 2023. That's not that much money. Upon reading this, like the day after it came out, did my own search, and I found actually he either should have waited a day or done a little more searching, because she was actually paid over $400,000 by the DeVos Association. So
now we're talking real, like, podcast money. What you and I would recognize as real money.
Yeah, we hope so. But a lot of people, this is exactly the equivalent to me of trying to discredit someone who speaks from a liberal point of view as being funded by Soros money. It's Soros money. And a lot of times those people are funded by Soros money. His son runs a big media organization, and he gives a lot of money to nonprofits. I always say, I try to be intellectually consistent with both points of view. Well, shouldn't we evaluate the actual arguments as opposed to the source of the funding? And in this case, half of his argument, half of Pablo's, was no, he's a conservative, is funded by conservatives. The other, I'm not going to say half, but let's say 40%, is he revealed, although this was out there, the structure of his report kept it till the end. So it seemed like a reveal to the audience. But Riley Gaines had a college coach who was tough, who was a Bobby Knight type, with swimming, but he was worse, allegedly, because he's now been sued by a number of his former assistants, who also, before they were assistants, were swimmers for him for sexual assault. So Riley Gaines is paid by the right, and her former college coach, who isn't her, but is someone who she credits with big success in pushing her in swimming, is now being sued for sexual assault. She says all the things, all the kind of pro forma, kind of anodyne things you'd want her to say about, I'm against sexual assault in all forms. I don't know anything about it, and there's no reason to think, and he didn't give us any evidence that she did know anything about it. But yeah, that's point two. And then I guess if you hate what Riley Gaines has to say, this will resonate with you. Oh, she claims to stick up for women in sports, but she didn't say anything about her college coach. Well, her specific issue is not the sexual assault issue of coaches and power dynamics like that. Her specific issue is, should someone who went through male puberty be allowed to participate in the NCAA championships? And he, on this show, on other shows, does a lot of things where he tries to make the point that it is both fair that they do so and that it is rare that it ever happens. And in a Mott and Bailey style, people retreat from the fair to the rare. Well, even if you think it's unfair, it only happens a small percentage of the time, to which I might argue, well, if it almost never happens, why shouldn't Democrats say give it up as a very important issue to them, or at least something that they have dug their heels in and are willing to lose elections over? That's one thing. But it is not fair. And it's very hard to address this issue and to tell me all these terrible things about Riley Gaines, which aren't really that terrible, just fit in with the fact that she's a conservative, while sidestepping, or in some cases trying to muddying the waters of if it's fair for someone who got the benefits of male testosterone in puberty, which is the case with Leah Thomas, swimming against women who did not, and in one case winning an NCAA championship. So I guess that's most of my critique. It's that it only gets there for people who hate Riley Gaines to begin with.
It kind of, this is a very bizarre bridge that I'm going to try to make to the next topic that I want to cover. But I think what you're highlighting here is some of the difficulty of, there are legitimate points to be made here, but it seems like Toure is both gilding the lily and kind of veering off into trying to make an ideological point that may or may not be supported by the facts that he cites, and also presenting what in media you'd call a dog bites man story. It's like, hey, guess what? You have a right-wing avatar who is being paid and funded and supported by right-wing financial forces. Like, yeah, no shit. It's a day of the week that ends in the letter Y. And so that's not
he put the numbers to it, which there is a value of. But as far as that goes, it would have been better if he put the 3 times number as opposed to the one he found. Put the one I found to it. Yeah.
And I think the problem there is that the nuggets of useful information in there are getting obscured by all this other stuff, the narrative stuff, the kind of pandering to the audience that he's looking for stuff, that kind of dilutes the amount of useful RDA of information that you should expect in there that the audience would actually benefit from. And it kind of connects to a story that's very much in the news, which is did Pete Hegseth commit a war crime or not? Question. To me, this is the kind of scandal that in an earlier era of America would have consumed an administration. You can also say that about like 25 things that happened since last Tuesday to the Trump administration.
Yeah. The pardon of the former president of Honduras who tried to addict Americans.
Well, he's in the middle of murdering 100 people off the coast of Venezuela for
they're related. You're killing the Venezuelans and bombing them after they're clinging to their wreckage because we can't have them shipping dangerous drugs to the United States. What about the guy we actually went through years and millions of dollars in convicting and have him behind bars? Oh yeah, he gets to get out.
Successfully convicted him.
Who convicted his brother? Who was the prosecutor, at least for one of the Hernandez brothers, and also running the prosecution? Emile Bove, who a top Justice Department official and now an appeals court judge. Yeah, right. So that's the scandal of the day. Yeah,
it should be an absolute conflagration among the media. But the question for me is, and maybe this is too tenuous a connection, but I do a segment on my new show called That's Bullshit. Mm-hmm. You do a segment on The Gist called Is That Bullshit? I'm not saying that they're cousins, but we seem to both have on our brains the potential that real important things that the public needs to pay attention to are getting drowned in a sea of bullshit. That we're like a lion seeing a herd of zebra and we're overwhelmed with the number of stripes. We don't even know what to target and take down anymore. And so I guess that's my question that I have scrolling across the bottom here is like, is the media able to even break through with an important story like this anymore? Or is it getting obscured by tsunami after tsunami of bullshit?
Yes, important story it is. And everyone's talking about it. And Congress members and members of the Senate are talking about it. It showed up. The timing of it was weird, right? Remember a little more than a week ago when a bunch of senators and members of Congress, all veterans or former CIA officials, put together that video and said, don't give up the ship. You have the right to refuse illegal orders. And since it was the tagline was "Don't give up the ship." I thought it was about these strikes in the Caribbean, or some of them were in the Pacific off the coast of Venezuela. But then they started talking about, oh, maybe this is don't give up the ship, or you're allowed to reject illegal orders if you're a member of the National Guard and you feel you were illegally deployed. And I said, wow, that's a muddied message. And then Trump comes in over the top, and he totally outrageously talks about sedition and the death penalty. For a second, I thought, it's not fair, but Trump probably gets the better of the argument because we always discount his excess, like calling for the death penalty. But he's shown the light on the fact that why are members of Congress getting in the way of the chain of command? And now, cut to today or a couple of days ago, we find out it really was about giving up the ship. So I think this is absolutely resonating. But what does resonating, or what does a public quote unquote caring really mean, given the dynamics of how our system works? And only the House can indict, and if they indict, only the Senate can convict, and you need more than a majority, which they don't even have. So Trump knows on policy issues he's going to get away with illegalities. Every once in a while, the public punishes him for, say, exciting the bond market with his original tariff plans, or lately he's today in a meeting, he talked a little bit about affordability being a scam. Not sure what he meant by that, but he knows he has to talk about affordability.
Oh, I thought it was all a Democrat hoax.
Yeah, everything's a Democrat. He tries all of the rhetorical gambits because his people and the Fox people will always support him on some of them. But yes, these things get through. The reason they don't isn't because I think, maybe, I don't want to accuse you of this, but there are some who think the media, or maybe three big newspapers, have the magical ability to, if they just phrase things like Heather Cox Richardson or the Bulwark would phrase things, then everyone's opinions would magically change. It just doesn't work. They tried taking Trump's press conferences off the stage. They did aggressive fact checking. Anyone who wanted to know was probably agreeing with you and agreeing with your "is that bullshit" segments, knew that it was bullshit. But that's not the way that human cognition and the American voter work. So yeah, I think it breaks through. I think that there is so much in our threat matrix that it's hard to prioritize, but every once in a while, an outrageously scandalous thing breaks through. And weirdly, not everyone in the public agrees with the salience of that thing. Number one point, there's no one who didn't know or have an opinion on if the election was stolen. And Trump still got reelected, even though a majority of Americans, and a pretty large majority, said he was lying about this fundamental aspect of democracy. So you can't blame the media for not informing the public, or the important stuff for not always getting through.
I like your you have a meta pushback embedded in what you just said, which is
you're a very generous debater or interlocutor, because you took what I said and you gilded that particularly very nicely. Sorry.
I'm like every movie critic out there. I'm finding all kinds of mise en scène that you never intended in what you're saying.
That's right.
I think you're making the point that the system may be different. The media, as such as it is, may be different than the Walter Cronkite days, than what we're used to, than what guys like us with a little gray in our hair, are kind of remember from our youth. But it doesn't mean it doesn't work. What people might be lamenting is sort of the fewer points of locus of control over the narrative, over, where you needed to go. You needed to influence Cronkite. You needed to influence Peter Jennings, what was getting on that show. Now look, case in point. You and I are live streaming right now. I make a joke at the top of every show about all the platforms we're on. We are on Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm looking at them right now. We're on 2 versions of YouTube. We're on Twitch. We're on Twitter. We're on both of our Substacks. So that is 8.
Too much.
That is 8. And even then, we're subject to all kinds of algorithmic whims, right? I did a show last week. For no apparent reason, that live stream blew up, about 10,000 views on YouTube in profile on the first viewing, and additional thousands elsewhere. I'm just like a look behind the curtain. Anyone can see these numbers. I can't even see what we're doing on Facebook or LinkedIn right now. I have no idea how many people are watching on Substack. So, I mean, talk about fragmentation and fracturing. What you're arguing is, you know what? It's breaking through. Even if the media is now splintered into millions of pieces, you have a shard, I have a shard. We're like on Oprah's show. You get a shard, you get an outlet. Even if it's splintered, it's still kind of collectively working. It's just much harder to wrap your hands around. Today, I have no idea, like what my little eyeball says. I have no idea how many people are watching right now. And for me, it's distressing because I feel that loss of kind of control, line of sight to what's going out, but it doesn't mean it's not breaking through at some level. So let me ask you this.
Well, let me also say you have to compare it to the baseline, the glory line, the glory days of yesteryear, when the evening newscasts were better watched, but they were only 20 minutes long. And even when they expanded to 30, there were still commercials. So there's very few items that could get through. I do a Substack. Part of my Substack is called The Gist List. Every day I round up articles, and some will be about the president of Honduras, but then there'll be all these obscure articles. So many obscure articles, so many fascinating things in the world. This pop-up theme park called Dragonland in Seattle that I found in the Seattle Times today, or an executive at Campbell's being fired because he said his soup was for poor people, or so much information. A lot of it is good, useful, interesting, quirky information. So compared to yesteryear, that amount of information, even good, reliable, factual information, would never have had a chance to reach any amount of the public. So you're dealing with that also. But sorry, go ahead.
No, I was about to shill your show a little bit. I was going to say you are the proprietor of the longest running news and information podcast on planet Earth. I happen to know a little something, I'm not going to reveal it, about your download numbers. You are consistently successful. Why? I know this is like a Mr. Burns softball population. Your campaign has the momentum of a runaway freight train. Why are you so popular, Mike Pesca?
Yes.
But I mean, why in this fractured, splintered media ecosystem are you so consistently successful?
I think Snurb has a point. Well, we have lost a bunch of audience. That's those surviving, not as thriving as we once were. Part of it is, if you look at that list, that Substack list of the most popular Substacks out there, just as a unit of measurement, I think you'll only find one person in the top 10 in politics who will consistently surprise you. And that's Nate Silver, because he's mostly driven. He has opinions on things and maybe some somewhat predictable centrism, center left, but he's mostly driven by the data that he himself generates. And that's his value add. So I think that while being consistent and intellectually consistent, like what I was trying to do with Riley Gaines, who, by the way, as a MAGA person, also does not get my motor running, right? I see all of Pablo Torre's points, but I just try to be consistent and say, if the shoe were on the other foot, if this was someone who is a liberal, if this was Greta Thunberg and some right winger was saying, I hate the way she looks, I hate the way she speaks, I hate the fact that she makes money off her quote unquote grift, I would maybe find that argument wanting. And so I try to be consistent and point out when the argument is wanting on the other side. I think what most people are wanting are things that affirm their worldviews. I think that is the number one way to have success in the media. But I and a couple others have tried to carve out a niche on the other side. A great new version of this, a website is called Tangle. It's run by Isaac Saul. I don't know if you know it or them.
He's been a guest for both of us.
Right. So I don't think he'll ever. Some people will say, well, look at what Isaac Saul is doing. He gives the left side, he gives the right side, he gives his take. He, is very, he very much shows his work and is very transparent. All of that, all of these are laudable things. And he's successful. He's quite successful. He's making millions of dollars, but he's not making tens of millions of dollars. I don't think it's a way to replace what's broken and fractured in the media. But I think that there are niches that can survive because there is enough of a desire to have the kind of media I try to do and that Isaac does and that a few others do too.
I think one of the things this is suggesting to me is I started Worth Knowing, the Substack, to be more of what the podcast set out to be at the beginning, much more of an old-fashioned variety news show, much more of like a news magazine where you're going to come in and get news and information that was interesting, different. That's why I called it Worth Knowing, which people told me, yeah, it's a little generic, but it's like that's what I was going for. And if there was going to be some politics in there, I was going to, give it in appropriate doses. And I think I've gotten too sucked into the Trump vortex. I really do. I think I cover too much week to week Trump politics, and I got to break out of it. Let me ask you this in that vein.
Well, what I try to do, and maybe you don't, is I try to say, let's say it wasn't Trump saying it. Let's say it was the best version that more or less was trying to do what Trump says he was trying to do. Would there be a merit to that? Right? So, excuse me. I covered Doge as a bunch of maniacs doing the wrong thing in the wrong way. However, what is the best case for establishing that there is a lot of waste in the government? What is the best case for talking about how to cut that waste or not? Or is there just going to be, you just have to, when we're talking about margins that big, there's going to be a small percentage of excess, and in absolute terms, it'll seem like a lot. But I thought that, I don't know if that's giving Trump the benefit of the doubt, but there is a reason. Look at it this way. Trump, like all good politicians, and Mamdani is like this, they're not really good at solving problems. They're excellent at describing problems. We basically elect politicians because their fingers are on what we find as the problem. This is the whole affordability issue. Remains to be seen if Mamdani's his policies will solve it. But if they're good at describing problems, and if they're good at telling us where, to some extent, the fault lines of society are, then I say, let's look at the fault lines. Let's see, not through the Trumpian exaggerated bullshit lens, but through the best possible lens. What can we say about some of these ideas that he's pursuing? And so maybe that's what I was doing with the, in a way, what I was doing with the Pablo Torre piece. In that, I do think the Republicans obviously vilify trans people and try to get elected on, no matter how big the issue is in the most extreme framing, no matter how many trans athletes there are in colleges, it's not that big a number and it's not that big an issue. So yeah, they're definitely exploiting it. But what's the best way to address the concerns of Seth Moulton, a Democratic representative, and Tom Suozzi, a Democratic representative, say, like, I'm a little concerned about trans girls participating in girls' sports. And so that's some of what I try to do. My audience likes it. The massive MSNBC type audience or Fox type audience will not, or Pablo Torre like audience, will not go in for that sort of experiment.
I want to quickly address one of the comments that I've just splashed up on the screen here from Kinky Streets. And I've gotten, 40 minutes into this live stream without acknowledging our chat family, which is a massive mistake. And I'm sorry. I know we're all like split brain today on Giving Tuesday. Kinky Streets points out that he disagrees with your previous point. If you go to a college of public service, public administration, you do learn how to solve problems. I think you're both right. I have a master's in public policy. And we learned a lot about solving problems. And I still think that the reason that Donald Trump thrives is because he is very good, as you say, Mike, at describing problems. He reminds me of, if anyone read The Tick, the satirical comic book, The Tick, back in the day, the fake superhero famously says, I don't want to destroy crime, end crime. I want to fight it. I think he presents himself as he just wants to fight crime. So does Bernie, by the way. Bernie just wants to keep describing the problem. Now, he has, to Bernie's credit, some solutions. They're not necessarily the right solutions, but he does offer some solutions. Trump basically offers more blame. But I think he's an excellent describer, an accurate describer. And I've written this in Newsweek of the core economic problem that we face. And that's one of the reasons he's been able to galvanize so much support.
But I also think on immigration, he is finding that by, quote unquote, solving the problem or bringing down illegal immigration, which he is through excessive means, I think you and I would both agree, he's solving the problem. Then what does he do? He takes the problem off the chessboard. You don't really get You might get some vague credit for it. I don't think you get votes for past problems solved. I think you get votes for what are you going to do for me next? And that's fair enough in a democracy. Now, as far as well, once you go to a school of public service, you learn to solve a problem. It's much bigger than that. You have good ideas to solve a problem. You can implement a solution. But if that were the case, why would Abundance be this #1 bestseller? Why would this better book than Abundance, which was written by Mark Dunkelman, Why Nothing Works, why would that be an accurate title? So the Why Nothing Works and Abundance thing could have talked to the Doge people on some level if they were actually willing to have a conversation. But
you read my mind, Pesca, because this is where I wanted to go. I wanted to go to one of your, and I even have the banner all ready to go for it. Look at this. You wrote a piece I was very fond of, and I'm going to quote it to you. You ready? The title this is in the Atlantic, The HRification of the Democratic Party, the party of norms, procedure, bureaucracy, DEI initiatives, rule following, language policing, and compliance. Your opening graph. Kamala Harris and Democrats sold themselves as the party of change, freedom, and not being weird. But many American voters saw them instead as prigs, Stepford wives, morons, and condescending smarty pants. This resonated with me, and I am a Democrat. I have worked for more than a decade for Democratic members of Congress, either as their chief of staff or campaign manager. I have skin in this game, but it does feel like a wonderful summation. And let me just say to all of our loyal chatters and all of the other people who are not chatting, but are listening, watching on one of these thousands of platforms that we're apparently on, I respect you if you work in human resources. I think human resources is an important function for companies to have. But every interaction I've ever had with human resources feels like a colossal waste of time. And they end up being in the position of being nags, prigs, and scolds. I'm sorry. That's just the way I feel. Sorry, not sorry. And it's not because you're bad people. It's because it's a bad setup. It's a rule-bound setup, kind of authored by company lawyers, that finds its way into the culture of whatever institution you serve, and it ends up being just a drag. And I feel like that has gotten infused into the Democratic Party, the party that I have worked to help for decades now. Does that capture your core point of this article? I thought it was just a great construct.
Very much. People have written that article just looking at men and why men don't like the Democratic Party, but even the women who work in HR, and by the way, I have statistics there, I think it's 80% women, they can't really defend what they're doing, all of what they're doing, except this is compliance. There is also, I have been thinking about that a little more, there is a line, which I think is true, HR isn't there to help you, meaning it's there to protect the company.
Yes.
So a lot, and then I did a little deep dive into the literature, and there's a magazine for HR professionals, and they debate and discuss, is HR there to help you? And this is where I think the Democrats have really gone wrong. People will take, especially the smarty pants thing. If you're gonna, I guess it's better to be seen as a regular old Joe, man of the people, Joe from Scranton. But if you're going to be the smarty pants or the dumbass, be the smarty pants, I say, right? People didn't mind that John F. Kennedy was very quippy and apparently quite clever, right? It was not a detriment to him. However, if you think about HR isn't there to help you, the Democrats have to be the person who's maybe at the company, who has your best interests in mind, who when you're third day on the job, and you're like, what the hell is going on with these forms? You say, listen, let me help you. Let me guide you through this. I'm not here to tell you that rules aren't applicable, but there's a way to do this, and I'm on your side. And that's what the Democrats have to communicate more, right? I'm not even advocating in the real world this wholesale what Sherrod Brown campaigns on, that he's going to be this populist. I think that is impossible for most Democrats, but I do think the Democrats could do a thing where they acknowledge, yeah, nothing works. I don't know why I'm supporting this other guy's book so much, but nothing works. I'm
a fan of Dunkelman. Dunkelman is married to a former colleague of mine who I worked with in campaign and congressional circles. So I'm a big fan. And look, I think it is your point. I mean, this is this is sort of what Thompson and Klein were trying to get at with abundance, and it's definitely what Dunkelman is getting at, is this idea that we have gotten so lawyered up, and I know I'm not going to offend anyone by dissing on lawyers, and I'm going to continue doing so. We have gotten into such a lawyered up mindset of, and look, I'm a Jewish dude, okay? One of the core reasons that I don't know why we've set up our entire faith this way, but Judaism is set up as a practice of creating ring fencing around rules. So there's a core rule that you get from scripture, that you get from the Torah. And then the function of Judaism, this is going to sound like I'm criticizing my own faith. I'm really not. Like, I say this with some admiration, but the whole construct is you set up a ring fence of rules around that. So you don't ever break through the ring fence. And so you never break the core rule. And then you set up a ring fence around that. And that is a lot of what HR has become.
One of the things that make Jews brilliant people, because they're educated in the Talmudic tradition of debate.
This is what we do, and we're great constructors of rules, and so are HR, and so is the Democratic Party, and that's why there's a mutual affiliation there.
Right, and what maybe Jewish scholars will do, will say, well, we have this restriction, this dietary restriction, but does a swordfish really count? That's a big debate. Or we have to surround our town with literal, you talk about fencing, with literal fencing, but can a small string actually count? And so they make sure that things count and satisfy the letter of God's law.
Right, exactly. But you also take an approach of, since we're not sure that maybe this fork didn't touch a piece of pork once, sometime, we're just going to have two sets of forks.
Yeah. But also it's good to have meaning and to be on the same page, and not to have others within the faith to allege a deep state or whatever the versions of nothing matters and there are no laws. In our last few minutes, or 14 minutes, can we debate if swordfish is kosher? No. Can we debate? I'm working on this. All right.
Hit me.
Lefty Gramps and everyone in the comments can help me. So as part of this Leah Thomas, Riley Gaines piece, it did dawn on me that we're really, really good in the last few years. The algorithms are good. The media is good. I think it's mostly the algorithms of identifying and elevating advocates who are poison to the other side. There used to be a time when some advocates, I think advocates, their idea was, let me go out and make an argument that the most people can agree with. But now that we're siloed and algorithmically determined, the idea is, let us go out and make an advocate who totally discuss the other side. So Andrew Tate might stick up for men's rights or something, but I don't know how many Republicans are on his side. Although when I look at the supposed popularity of Nick Fuentes, maybe more than I would suspect. But a guy like Andrew Tate, a person like Riley Gaines, these are so, like I said, poisonous to the other side. Or of all the members of Congress, Jasmine Crockett is a certain type of thing. And one of those things are, think about the word cloud around her, and rebellious and strong, but also, real thumb in the eye. And she's just anathema to the other side for reasons that don't even have to do with racism. I can't think of too many advocates in the last few years who, and don't say Bernie, this is part of the rules, because Bernie is someone who tries to appeal to both sides, who isn't almost designed in a lab to not just rally the troops, but disgust the enemy. We don't have any of those people anymore. That's challenge one. And challenge two.
Oh, there's more. You're going to give me an impossible challenge and you're going to embed it inside an enigma. Okay,
challenge
go on.
I'm thinking about Doge. I'm thinking about immigration. And always, especially with the Trump administration, the solution is never the scalpel. It's always the chainsaw. And then I started thinking, all right, let's go beyond the Trump administration. I had on a guy from the Obama administration who was essentially the Doge executive, and he had some little changes that he got through, but there was no fanfare to them, and I don't know how many lives were changed. The way we're set up now, is the scalpel really possible? What are the examples of the scalpel actually being used to an effect that actually solves problems and also helps politicians? It seems like we're definitely in a poisonous advocate realm and a chainsaw only moment. If you could think of other examples, you have an advanced degree in policy.
Oh, geez.
I welcome
Yeah, that's that's a subtle. That feels like a Southern bless your heart. It's like you have an advanced degree,
Well, I
and
defer to your
he's a
advanced degree, my
douchebag.
good friend on the other side of the aisle.
I oh gosh, you've really gone deep here. All right, I'm going to try very hard not to make this my unified field theory of the entire universe over the
Okay.
next 60 seconds. But I
Okay.
do think there's a thread. I'm not going to be able to keep all this straight in my own brain as you were
Right.
talking, but I do think that there is a thread that connects all of this. The insight that Newt Gingrich fundamentally had 30 plus years ago was that the media ecosystem had changed and that there was no advantage whatsoever to moderating or trying to find, middle ground, softening anything you were saying. That rhetorical maximalism was the way to go because any softening you did of your own rhetoric and your own position was merely giving value to the other side. In an increasingly fractured ecosystem in the media, you had to get attention. The way to do that was sharp, declarative, contrastive, polarizing statements and moves. That's the whole point. I have a Republican pollster friend. I can't believe I'm saying that statement, who is constantly pointing out to me that the virtue politically of what Trump is doing, pick an action that he's doing, isn't that it garners the center, that garners the mainstream of American politics. It's that it's polarizing, it's galvanizing for his side. And so your question was, are there any advocates left who don't just function to piss off the other side? Look at Caroline fucking Levitt, which is legally her middle name now. Her entire existence at the podium. Look, you interviewed Karine Jean-Pierre, who is she's annoying to both sides. So, that's like a superpower.
Embarrassing to one.
Yes. I
Another,
used to work with her back when she worked in the Obama White House. And I wish I had good stories, but I'm not going to share them right now. But Caroline Levitt's entire raison d'etre is to take your raise and to re-raise fucking threefold, right? To say, you know what? Not only are you wrong, but you should be sent to hell. I'm going to call for your execution immediately. It's to raise the stakes rhetorically to get your side to go, yeah, screw them. And where does it go back to? It goes back to where we started the discussion, which is the insight that Newt had before anyone else, that because of the change in media, because of the way the things were different in how you communicated with voters, you had to adapt your strategy, what you offered politically, and what you said. And I think we are the grandchildren, essentially, of that insight, and we're living in it right now.
Yes.
I don't know if I tied things together well
enough.
It's
good.
There.
It's good. I agree with it. And the accelerant is when Newt had this insight, the technology that he leveraged was C-SPAN. He was very good at giving speech to an empty chamber on C-SPAN. Now the technology, and no one watched C-SPAN even then. Now the technology that can be levered is Instagram and TikTok and every social media app that's in everyone's pocket and in everyone's consciousness. So what the Newt insight was, multiply it by at least 1,000 to get to today.
Right. And as people are pointing out in the chats, we just had this as a real-time experiment on Twitter, which I refuse to call X because that's another one of Elon Musk's insane fever dreams. We just had this as a real-time experiment on Twitter where all of a sudden they required, for reasons that escape understanding, the location information of posters. And it turned out that many of the biggest right-wing accounts with the most followers, in the kind of the MAGA ecosystem, were located abroad. So much for America First. And they were likely, as we suspected all along, bots and trolls. This is a point that, people are making here in the chats. Who's saying this? I want to give proper credit, damn it. Amethyst Peony. There she is.
Is there a real Amethyst Peony, or is this a Slovakian bot?
It could be. I can't prove. I don't know who any of these. There is someone who actually Chipmunk Milk hasn't been here for a while, but I only know most of these people through their handles, and unless they're explicitly their full names, I don't know who you are. Lefty Gramps. I assume Lefty's a real person, but I enjoy, if you're just a bot, then you are the best Turing test I've ever received. You are truly delightful. I mean, so yes, and the people who are pointing out that Frank Lutz gave an assist on kind of weaponizing all of this to the maximum extent, totally correct. So I mean, yes, I think that that's where we've landed, and it does come full circle back to the observation that the way to thrive in an attention economy with a fractured ecosystem, with no Walter Cronkite kind of calling balls and strikes on top of everything, is the Newt Gingrich strategy. We're living in the sort of crack cocaine, ketamine version of that. And I'm now going to turn the tables on you because I have enough doom scrolling. I've had enough of it. I can't take it. You write about actual good news, and I want to talk about it for a second. Damn it all. You've pointed out some positive trends. This is one of the reasons people should subscribe to The Gist, because in every show you get something interesting and different. And I'm going to force you to pivot to it. You have highlighted, I'm going to give you a menu. You pick one that you'd like to expand on. You've highlighted the remarkable decline in childhood poverty, miraculous public health outcomes, historic declines in police violence. That's just a starter. Give me the piece of good news that's come to your attention recently that you wish people knew more about.
Well, let's just take declines in police violence. So from year to year, the same number of people from before Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd killing till now, since they've been tracking it, it doesn't really change much. This would suggest, I'm not saying that's good news. This would suggest that there are broader dynamics at play than the allegations of either the cops or their biggest critics. When we're a society in washing guns, police are going to be on edge and have to, or feel they have to, shoot sometimes. However, I just look at New York City. I did a big deep dive about this podcast called Empire City, which purported to tell the history of the NYPD. And it was very well done because the guy behind it, wonderful storyteller, Moth Champion, but also an avowed police abolitionist, which you can be if you play it straight with the rest of the stuff, but he generally didn't. And part of the police abolitionist message, and this message said over and over again in the podcast, is reform is not possible. We tried the reform and it's not possible. So here's the thing, maybe to get a little bit happy about. When they started counting such things in the early 1970s, literally how many times any NYPD officer discharged a gun, the first couple of years, it was over 2,000 shootings by NYPD officers. And those shots hit hundreds of people and killed many hundreds. And before then, we thought that it was over 100 killed by police in certain years. Police were also being killed at a higher rates. Early 1970s, 2,000. Last year, the number of times I don't have last year, I have 2023. The number of times the NYPD not shot and hit, just discharge a gun, was in the 30s. So
wow.
If you're going to tell me that reform is impossible, that number belies that assertion. And I believe in 23, 7 people were killed, and they were all armed at the time, and 3 or 4 of them were shooting at police, and there was one hostage situation. This always happens. So these things aren't solvable maybe from 2021 to 2022. They actually greatly track the overall violent rates. But yes, police reforming can be done. It has been done. It's been done in the most criticized police department in the United States. So that's good news. I think it's good news.
That's good news.
I know that it happened, and then let that affect your opinion of if reform is possible.
I grew up hearing a lot of gunshots all the time, and that's great. That is some good news.
What corner of New York did you grow up in? I never asked.
Upper West Side.
Yeah.
I grew up across from Duke Ellington's house.
So Needle Park, Panic in Needle Park was how far from where you lived?
Oh, geez. I honestly don't know which Needle Park you're referring to, because
there
seriously,
were so many Needle Parks.
I'm not making this up. There was a little micro park, probably built by Robert Moses, right on the corner. I was in between Riverside Park and this little Morningside Park. I mean, It was so covered in crack vials. I mean, you would crunch on it like snow walking to the bus to go to school in the morning. Anyway, Yes, it's
Oh,
hard to narrow it down. All right, here's another great feature of the Gist. You have on authors, and one of the reasons I subscribe is that this is going to sound bad. This is going to sound like a backhanded compliment. One of the reasons I subscribe is I don't always listen.
mhm.
It is great to have as it's like a magazine on your coffee table. It's like,
Right.
oh, this is great. I like this. And sometimes I get these delightful surprises. I'm listening to one thing. I'm like, yeah, I'll listen to the next thing. And it totally takes me. So I listened to, you had an author on of a book about measurements. It's called Beyond Measure. And
Oh,
I
I love
learned
that guy.
so many delightful facts, like these old-fashioned measures of like how far a reindeer can travel before it urinates, or
Yes.
and
We
the
measure the
history of
things
them.
that were important. And if you're a Laplander, that's vitally important.
Right. It reveals so much about a lost world.
Yes.
So I'd like you to pick from something that I don't know. What is an interview where you left? And this has happened to me so many times in interviewing people. I put down the microphone. I'm like, oh, wow, that was so cool. I just learned something really interesting.
Well, a great interview I did was with a guy named John D. Lennon, and I did the interview. He was joining me from Sing Sing prison because he's been there for 24 years, and he was great. He wrote a book about true crime. He interviewed 4 other murderers. He's in there for murder. He's really smart. One of the murderers was, as a New Yorker, you'll remember the name Robert Chambers,
Yes, I do.
preppy
The
killer.
preppy killer.
Yeah, we had a really good conversation about, because he was even in one of these true crime documentaries, specials, and it was with Chris Cuomo as host. And they really did a bait and switch on him. And what power does he have? They assured him he wasn't going to be the face of evil. And the name of the documentary was something like The Face of Evil. Another one, I'm trying to remember. This is, oh, sorry, I went away from the mic. Yes, here it is. I didn't know you were going to ask. I just interviewed this guy, Mikhail Zygar, who's a Russian journalist who had to flee Russia because he was against the Ukraine war, and that'll get you killed in Russia. And so here's just a bizarre fun fact from that, of which there are a lot of fun facts. Alexander Solzhenitsyn?
Oh, sure.
Solzhenitsyn? Sure. Dissident journal, writer, Gulag Archipelago. He lived in a gulag. So he liked to think and write outside, and he'd literally set up a desk outside. And one day he's writing at his desk and he looks up and a wolf is staring at him. And then from out of the corner of his eye, he sees another wolf, and he realizes he's being triangulated right before a wolf attack.
Geez.
And he almost gets torn to pieces by wolves. Here's my question for you, Matt. Where do you think this took place?
I can't even begin to guess. I can't. I don't know. Hit me.
Like where in Siberia, right? No, Vermont. It's when he was in America. So the guy escapes the gulag and almost gets attacked by a wolf in the woods, like in
We
Peter and the
need
Wolf.
fundamental reform of wolves. Okay, that was my attempt.
Millionaire wolves and
Well,
they're
that's
predators.
the answer to corporate wolf overlords. Okay, let me get you out of here on this. You before you were in the honest news business, you were in the sports news business.
Yeah.
Sports has fundamentally changed so much. We could do such a deep dive. I wrote for Newsweek a piece. It was mostly focused on cannabis, but also touched on sports gambling and pornography. And it was titled, at the advice of my editor, "We legalized our sins, and now they're coming back to bite us."
Right.
We have really let the genie out of the fucking bottle when it comes to sports gambling. We've had kind of these double-edged developments in statistics that have fundamentally changed the way many sports are played. Started with baseball, fundamentally changed basketball, fundamentally changed football. My question to you is: sports better from when you started in the sports game? Is sports healthier? Is it more interesting to watch? I mean, I can watch all kinds of, like, I'm crushing like Serie A soccer games on the weekends because I can watch that shit now. Like,
La Liga?
so it's amazing. Yeah. I mean, like, your access is incredible, but like, is sports better?
I think it's better. I think the players have gotten better. I think the strategies have gotten deeper. There are trendlets away from that. So baseball When I first started, I was on a show called Hang Up and Listen, and we used to prattle on about one or two huge indignities in the sports world. And one is statistical illiteracy among baseball personnel, and they would constantly do these stupid things like bunt and try to steal bases. And then that got totally eradicated from the game. And there was a statistical revolution, and there was this thing called the shift, and it absolutely made the game worse. It made the game more boring. But, since then, they realized the game was more boring. They legalized the shift, which as a method, just I'm philosophically against. But all these other changes, like essentially a pitch clock and going faster, it sped the game up. It made the game so much more exciting. So I think that's better. I think in the NBA, you do have the problem of too many threes distorting the game. Yeah. I don't know if they're going to legislate against that, but I do think that there's a way to exploit it. And if you get deep down, certain teams like the Houston Rockets are trying the different things, which is somewhat exciting. And I think football is much more exciting. That's because of advanced strategy, unbelievable athleticism. Every game has a one-handed catch. Do you remember a few years ago, Odell Beckham?
Oh,
that
sure.
One-handed catch.
Yeah,
I think that would be maybe the 8th best catch this year. There was a Brock Bowers catch in the end zone, the tight end on the Raiders. Just amazing stuff. And also the technology has gotten so better. The clarity of television has gotten better. That comes with a curse of constantly debating if a play happened or didn't, or what was the line to gain. So the forensic videography is a bad outcome of all of our technology. So in general,
I want to address, let's get to the very real, very human flesh and blood Lefty Gramps, who I in no way meant to siliconize earlier, who wants to know what about the pitch clock in MLB. I'm going to take this one because I got to reveal something to our audience here. I hate baseball. I think baseball is boring as hell. I think there's a reason it's called America's pastime, because they can't bring themselves to call it a sport, because it's really not one. It's a way to pass time, and not a particularly great one. I will say, though, that all of the innovations, the slightly bigger bases, the pitch clock, the anti-shift rules, it's gotten more watchable. I actually quite enjoyed the baseball playoffs this year. Yeah. It is... Oh, I'm sorry, Lefty. I'm sorry. I'm just not a baseball guy. Although I'm a smart enough man when I married a Red Sox fan as a born New Yorker to give her a roll of Yankees toilet paper. So, I can manage, Yeah. But look, I'm with you. Boy, I would like to take up so much more of your time. I'd like to talk about sports gambling. I'd like to talk about, I'd love to. But I really shouldn't. I should really let you go. You're a busy man.
Let's to site gambling, parlay this conversation into a future plan for a future discussion. We can do Vice. We could just do only Vice.
We're going to do only Vice. Let's do only Vice. We're going to do our next appearance that we do together. We're going to do a no Trump rule.
Okay.
No Trump. We're just going to talk about everything else. All right.
Do we do the verbal equivalent of the thing where we put in asterisks so you don't have to say it?
Well, you know what we do?
It's a very blue sky way of writing Trump. Yeah.
Here, I'm going to do a little pitch for a second here. I do a show every week now. My new show is called Political Rehab with a Republican. And we start out every week with our Trump dump, where we take just 3 minutes, both of us, to just unload on something that's pissed us off about Donald Trump, so we can get it out of our system and move on with the rest of our lives. It's not that we don't ever bring up Trump again in the course of the show. We clearly do, but we just try and get it. And we want to let the audience know that a Republican and a Democrat can still agree about something, which is that Donald Trump is the fucking devil. And then we move on. So anyway, we will do this. I am going to, in the meantime, pop up here Mike Pesca. .substack.com. I hope people will subscribe. The Gist is really worth it. It really is. Thanks, it is truly like it is one of my go-to. I think there's a limited bandwidth space that people have for like podcasts that they're subscribed to that they really want to show. Like showing up in their feed. This is one of them. Why? Because every third show there's something that's like, oh, I don't even necessarily need the whole show. I want to listen to 10 minutes of this, and it's always something like surprising, different. I really enjoy it. I hope people will check it out. And I'm worth knowing.substack.com. And Mike, thanks so much. We're going to do this again. No Trumps.
You are truly worth knowing.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you. All right. In the meantime, till then, next week we've got noted legal scholar Glenn Kirshner coming back to the show to do a roundup of all things legal. A lot of Supreme Court action. We didn't get a chance to talk about that. That's going to be a really fun show. In the meantime, stay safe, be well. We'll see you.